Check this out.
This is Radio Love Never Heard Before.
Thank you for joining me here today. I'm your host, Jonathan Playtech, and for the next couple of minutes, I will be discussing the oil prospects of Saudi Arabia and the potential repercussions for oil consumers around the world. I would just like to take a moment to thank the crew at 643 Sports at www.blogtalkradio.com/643sports for providing the audio equipment for this little segment. Thank you very much. Saudi Arabia is one of the key petroleum exporters in OPEC and indeed the world. It exports roughly 8.6 million barrels of petroleum products per day, with an astonishing 7.2 million barrels of that being crude oil. Saudi Arabia is one of the key suppliers of petroleum products, specifically crude oil, to the United States, Asia, and Europe. About 50% of Saudi crude exports, 3.6 million barrels per day, are exported to nations in Asia. 1.41 million barrels per day make their way to the United States, which is good enough to become the third largest U.S. supplier in 2005, and around 500,000 barrels of crude per day arrive in various states throughout Europe. Now, Saudi Arabia controls roughly 260 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, which is an estimated 1/5 of proven world reserves for crude oil. To put this into perspective, Saudi Arabia, out of all the other countries that are known to have oil, has roughly 1/5 or 20% of all that oil. Furthermore, it is estimated that over half of Saudi oil reserves are located in only 8 fields, meaning about 130 billion barrels of proven oil reserves are situated in only 8 fields out of over 100 producing oil and gas fields in Saudi Arabia. The oil fields in Ghawar and alone represent roughly half of Saudi oil production capacity. Changing gears, we can now quickly turn to the political instability of Saudi Arabia, something that has become quite an issue of late, and something that will be wrapped up a little later. Daniel Kaufman, Art Cray, and Massimo Mastruzzi have come up with an instability index, which combines economic and political indicators to arrive at a measure for political instability. In their findings, Saudi Arabia in 2006 had a rating of 0.65, which was considerably down from the 2004 rating of 1.08. Comparing these numbers with the instability index of Iraq, clearly a quite unstable country politically, of 2.91 for 2006 and 3.07 for 2004 respectively, we can see that Saudi Arabia has a definite degree of political uncertainty and instability. For example, in 1996, the world watched on as 370 people were injured and 19 killed in a bomb attack on the Khobar Towers in Tehran. In 2003, there were bomb attacks that killed nearly 40 people in Riyadh. These incidents show that there is a clear political unrest in Saudi Arabia, and that unrest can quickly turn into violence and upheaval. Now, why was such emphasis put onto concentration of Saudi oil reserves, you ask? This is done because nearly 10% of proven oil reserves lie in 8 known fields, which, given the political instability of Saudi Arabia in the last decade, which was just highlighted, would seem to be a rather large prize for an up-and-coming political regime in Saudi Arabia to try to snatch. We have already seen that violence aimed towards political ends are not absent in Saudi Arabia, and seizing nearly 10% of the world's oil reserves, along with the world's largest oil-producing facilities in the form of those at Ghawar, would certainly grab the attention of the current regime in Saudi Arabia. Also, the destruction, or attempt thereof, of oil fields is nothing new to the Middle East. Saddam Hussein set fire to the oil fields he seized in Kuwait as he was being driven out of Kuwait by U.S. forces. This potential scenario of a hostile political regime or faction seizing or destroying Saudi Arabian oil fields could effectively halt oil production in Saudi Arabia, with other producers unwilling and unable to pick up the slack. There would almost certainly be panic in the oil importing countries in the form of astronomically high prices for petroleum products. This scenario is clearly not a good one for both the Saudi people and for the oil consumers around the world, and it is certainly one that needs to be watched and prepared for. Thank you for joining me today, as I hope I was as informative as possible, and perhaps you may have learned a thing or two. Once again, thank you to 643 Sports for the use of their audio equipment. Join John and Rich every Tuesday and Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time at www.blogtalkradio.com/643sports for 643 Sports, the most comprehensive, in-depth, and hopefully funny sports radio show on the internet. Thank you for listening in. This is Jonathan Playtech signing off.